Welcome to the audience. My name is Dr. Nathan Beel, and I am here with Associate Professor Cathy Bettman to talk to her about counselling research, and particularly her story of research, and also her ideas around the place of research, her experience in research, and why research might be useful for counsellors. I'm wondering, Cathy, would you like to be able to introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about your counselling journey as well as academic journey, and maybe what you're doing nowadays?
Okay, so yes, I've got this grand title of Associate Professor, Deputy Dean of Counselling at Cairnmillar, and it's absolutely fascinating that the minute I got that title, suddenly everybody wanted to be my friend on LinkedIn, whereas before I never got to hear from anybody, and I'm the same person. So in regard to my research history, I remember doing a master's of counselling and family therapy, and actually it was a phenomenal master's and it was a great opportunity. And I won't say universities or anything like that, just to keep it all nice and confidential. But when I was there, we did have one research unit. And I remember really trying to keep awake. And, it might be easier now online where you can just maybe hide your camera, but that was on campus and I was really struggling to keep awake. And I think my boredom was because it was very theory-based. And, when you have those big words coming at you and all these different things and stats, it's like, not interested. Why am I doing this? I wanted to do counseling, couple therapy at that point, not this. So, it just went over my head and hated it. And then I got that qual, and it got to the point where I had a supervisor who said to me, "What are you doing? You can't keep collecting master's degrees." And the reason I did that was because I thought, if you're going to do PD, you might as well let it really count. He said, you can't keep doing master's degrees. Really, you have to do something more worthwhile. You have to do your PhD. And I was like, whoa, what are we talking about here? Because it sort of seemed like a crazy dream. And let me say right now at the outset, it was a huge lesson, because there I was thinking the more master's degrees I had, the more acceptable I would be in academia and everywhere else, getting a job and everything like that. Not the case. What counts in academia is your publications and having a PhD. So, if I could look back and scrub out many of the masters, although I can't really say that because it was a terrific learning opportunity, I would have had a PhD and a lot more publications. So I'm saying this because I was just somebody that wanted to do counseling. And then once I actually was told, you want to get any further, do a PhD. And I actually did it. It was the best experience of my life.
Can I just jump in there? So it sounds like you were nudged and you're sort of like, were you trying to get into academia at the time, or were you already in academia?
No, I wasn't. I was actually working as a couple and family therapist. And it was just that I had done so many masters that he said to me, "Why are you doing this? I think you should really go for a PhD." And at the time, working as a couple and family therapist and sitting in sessions where DV was like rife, like 1 out of every 4, if not more, couples were actually working with issues around DV. And then being given the opportunity to work in the men's group with some fantastic men facilitators, I started asking a lot of questions. And then my supervisor's voice kept coming to me, "Well, why aren't you doing a PhD? Why don't you do this?" And so I did. And so, as I say, it was the most phenomenal experience. Difficult because it's time consuming and families don't always understand that. And it's really bum on seat kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, honestly, doorways open for me. And that was my entry point into being more seriously academic, because I then, at the organization where I was at, they offered me the position of heading their teaching branch. And that just then was a progression into academia. And once you've got a PhD, and with the few numbers of PhDs that we've got, it really opened doors. And I think the other thing that for me was such a fantastic, what can I say, learning experience was my research supervisor said to me, you know, you're doing your PhD and you're doing it in domestic violence, and that is really, really important. But what is important is that you're also learning the process. And now you owe it to the discipline and counseling, which is the discipline, but to, students, to share this with them. And that has been the great part about it. So I love finding out about DV. I loved writing about DV. But now working with students to achieve their PhDs or master's degrees has been just fantastic, a wonderful experience.
So for someone who was hiding in their class in the research,
totally,
to now, yeah,
totally,
to now actually having the confidence to be able to support other people through those research journey, it sounds like quite a transformation.
Fantastic. And you know, so many things have changed since I did my PhD. One of the things was, for example, I had one supervisor. There was no, you got to have a few. One supervisor. And 6 months before I finished my writing up, she said to me, I'm leaving the university that she was at. I've got a really special role at another university, which was in another state. And she said, you can choose. You can stay where you are, or you can come with me. Well, there was no option. I had no one else to support me. So I actually graduated on a campus that I'd never put my foot on, ever.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Today, I think that pressure is taken away a little bit because you have a minimum of 2, if not 3 supervisors. So I think for students, it's an even fuller experience than what I had. Although, you know, I was really thrilled with my supervisor. She was amazing, and lots of lessons learned from her about how to support, but let the student find their own way. And I think that was a great learning experience.
And how did you actually, like here you are as a practitioner, you've done some masters, and I imagine they're coursework masters, would that be right?
Yeah.
You did coursework masters.
Oh, I didn't do coursework masters.
No?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wrote my research proposal. I submitted it to the HREC. It was accepted, and I was accepted as a student. But, this is the but, I had to pay my own, there was no scholarship involved. So I had to pay my own way. But having said that, and I know where you're getting to as an academic, the difficulties for students and for educators to know when students are okay to be doing this further study if they haven't gone through that process. But I will say that I'm now supervising 3 students for PhDs that didn't do a formal Masters of Research. They did what used to be done sometimes, but is becoming more scarce. They did their 3 units of research within a master's degree, Masters of Counselling degree. So they had the theory, they came up with their research proposal, it got tidied up, they did a ethics application, and then they actually carried out the study over 2 semesters. They wrote it up in the form of a journal article, and some of those fantastically were actually published. So they had that experience, and they've transitioned into PhDs and got accepted quite easily. But I know that is at the moment a bit of a sticking point. Some universities don't accept students unless they've done a pretty formal entry training, and it's rare that you do, but there are places that still do. Yeah.
So that would be an important consideration for students who want to aspire towards a PhD, is choose your masters carefully to ensure that it's got a sufficient research preparation in it, so you can get some runs on the board, so to speak. Or at least potentially go for, if they've done an honours program in undergrad, that might also be sufficient as well for entry.
I mean, it's a discussion point with us as educators as well, because it's how to provide that transition that's easy within our master's degrees, but still have sufficient counselling, both theory and skills training, all within what is usually a 2-year period. And that's not easy either.
That's absolutely a challenge, because there's more and more going into the curriculum, and we're also wanting to prepare students to, the formation of the counsellor, but then also where is space for research? And that's, I guess, a big challenge we have.
And the problem is too, that unless students are given that hands-on experience, not the boring, just learn the theory stuff, they don't want to do it. I've had so many students that go, this is not for me. And then they do it. And we used to have like a mini colloquium where they used to present, and the joy of what they had discovered, the process of discovering it, and then the presentation of it was palpable. You could feel how satisfied they felt.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one, because you've got to push students into it a little bit.
Yeah. So you're sort of saying they need nudges, just like you got a nudge, they might need a bit of nudging as well.
Yeah. And support too, because I think it's even getting more difficult. Manageable. I don't want any student looking at this and then going, oh no, well then I'm not going to do it. But the process of getting ethics approval is not the best part of doing a PhD. And I think some ethics committees are becoming more and more sticky and asking for stuff that really one questions the relevance of it. I understand there has to be that process, and it has to be in depth, and all those things accountable, but sometimes it's a little bit over the top.
Sure. That's almost like what you're highlighting is there can be some hurdles in the PhD journey. And one of those hurdles is ethics, if you're doing a project which requires ethics approval. And any other hurdles that you sort of see in that PhD journey?
Oh, there's so many, really, in the sense of all manageable, but they're challenging points when you're doing a PhD. Now, my experience has been in qualitative research, so they might be very different from a more quantitative work. Some people, when you're doing a qualitative study, when it comes to the analysis, the gaining of data, usually through semi-structured interviews, is a piece of cake. It's fun. This is what we do. We want to talk to people. But afterwards, you get this huge amount of data, and then you have to sift through it, and usually you code it, and very often you do a thematic analysis, and that can be messy. So sometimes for students who are very black and white and organized and want to tick boxes and just get that done, that can be a point where they're tearing their hair out, because they go through it and they
see, I've done my thematic analysis. I've torn my hair out.
It's funny. But that can be one of the challenges. One of the challenges, for example, if they do qualitative surveys, is that whilst they can be very intense because people put a lot in a very short answer, they nevertheless are frustrating because you want to know more and you want to say, oh, but you said that here. What do you mean? Tell me more. And you can't, because that's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there are these times, when you butting heads.
Yeah.
with yourself more than anything else. And I'll tell you another one that's, for me, very current in working with my current PhD students, is that because there's such a small number of counselling PhDs, very often co-supervisors come from related but different disciplines. So at the moment, I am co-supervising in one case with a psych associate professor. She's great. We seem to manage. But then there's another one that there starts being a few little problems. And the one that's really interesting, the tension, not on a personal level, but on a discipline level, is with social sciences, because they come from, what can I say? Their way of presenting the thesis is different to the way my experience has been in qualitative thesis writing, which actually makes me think of another thing. The different requirements for a thesis, for a PhD, can vary now from university to university. Traditionally, in the past, it was fine to have a study where you had between 20 to 30 interviewees for semi-structured interviews, a qualitative study, and you wrote a big major thesis, 100,000 words. At some places, that's not enough. At some places, they require that you actually do 2 related studies, you have publications, and then you write a smaller overarching thesis. And the one argues that the other isn't enough. And the one will argue that, doing publications is challenging because you don't know if they'll be published in the time frame. Although some say, no, you don't need to have them published. You just need to have them ready to go and as possibilities and ready to submit. So there's still a lot, and I guess it'll go on forever, about what is required, and are there other means of doing it? Like, at one university, they would have like maybe the study and then even writing a novel and then an exegesis sort of thing on that. So we could maybe come up with creative ways of presenting our data and disseminating it, in different ways.
Yeah, that sounds like if you're someone who wants to become a PhD student, you've obviously need to find a supervisor who aligns with your topic and methodology, and as well as consider that the choice of your supervisor and the institution they're attached to, they may have some different requirements for what's expected in a doctoral PhD compared to another institution who may have different expectations around that.
And I guess I've got to be careful because I have very strong views. Like, to me, keep it simple, but get an outcome that's a contribution to the discipline. To me, that's much more important than having all these fancy ways that there's a lot of toing and froing, and I don't think it gets any further, really. And it takes people so much longer. Do something that's going to provide a contribution. That's my idea. I also had another thought where, my failing maybe, I hope, makes it easier for somebody else. When I finished my PhD, I thought, what the hell? This is just going to be sitting on a university shelf, and the publications I got as a result of it. This is just going to preach to the converted. Right. What's the point? So I actually wrote a novel based on my PhD. And then I started looking for a publisher, right? So sent it off. The first one came back, said, unfortunately, we can't publish this now, but we really encourage you to keep going with it because it has value. Of course, I didn't hear the second bit.
Sure.
I only heard the first bit. Distraught. They don't like it. It'll never get published.
Yeah.
So the second one that I got was a very private, small publishing company that encouraged sort of different, more controversial stuff. and they agreed to publish it. And it was great. And I had a publication, and I had got it at one of the bookstores in Sydney, quite a big bookstore, and they had this big event. And then it was finished because it was such a small publisher that their opportunities for getting it out there were not very big. I did have an interview on ABC, which was also great. Right? So the point I'm making is that we mustn't get thrown by the first negative, this won't go, even for an ethics application, even for a research proposal. Just keep going, because it doesn't mean you're bad, and it doesn't mean your work hasn't got value. Keep trying. I mean, I think of J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. I don't know what number of submissions she made. Well, I can't equate to that. I'm just making the point. We get so challenged by thinking we're not okay that we don't do it when we should.
Yeah. And certainly the metrics that universities often use, they're encouraging all these numbers, citations, and that, whereas we don't know some of the readers that might read, which they may not turn up in the citation, but they might have quite a profound impact on a small number of people's lives, but very profound impact. So it's really hard to know what level of impact is my work actually having.
Exactly. I think that's such an important point, because really, when I think of some of my master's students, like this one came into my mind, he was looking at counselling amongst Asian people in Australia. And, what came out of that was so important. And even if it was disseminated amongst that population, I think it would have been great, because we need to teach people about counselling. So if it's in magazines, if it's not necessarily in peer-reviewed journals, it still would be doing so much good, but it's not really respected.
No, it's often not acknowledged.
Not in academia.
Yeah.
And that's such a shame. And I think we lose, that's another completely, I'm going a little bit left of field here, but so many students do valuable research in their master's degrees. Yes, they're very small studies, but they are so important, and it just gets lost because they leave and, they go on to jobs and other things. And so that never gets published. And that's such a shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's probably so much research out there that never just gathers dust on a bookshelf somewhere. And
exactly.
And
if
that's
it
some of the
even reaches a bookshelf.
That's some of the skill, I think, in academia, and this is probably for people who are, publishing and wondering, is that whole challenge of how do we promote our work so that people are aware of it, and that's something I think the national heads of counselling and psychotherapy education, we're also looking at, is how do we promote our work, how do we get stuff out there. Because otherwise, because we're often, counsellors don't tend to be, we're not extroverts. We don't tend to sort of do a lot of our own marketing. But, and because we don't do that, often I think people don't realise what's out there, what we've done.
Totally. And I think there's also an interesting question here. I've worked at some places, unis, where, and certainly it happened with mine, if you are my research student, you have to put my name on any publication that you have submitted. But I've worked at other universities where, unless you have actually contributed a great deal to the writing of the article, they don't want you to put your name on it. Right. They don't mind having an acknowledgement, but they don't feel that it's fair. So I still think there are quite a few areas, because, you work in one place, it's not allowed. So you come out with no publication. Then you're working at another place where you're getting a lot of publications just because your students are publishing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all that comes into the issue of what is actually regarded as contribution, is mentoring contribution. And given that you've been a key decision maker in the process, it certainly raises quite a few discussion points.
I think so.
Yeah. So look, Cathy, just a couple more questions. One is, what do you, given how many years of research would you have done by now?
You're going to give away my age,
Okay.
which is something I don't want to go down there.
Yeah, we could just say if
Oh,
you've been doing this for a few years,
yeah,
let's just go there.
yeah.
What would be, one of the research things that you've been most proud of as you look back on your time as a researcher?
That's such an interesting question, because I started off with my research into domestic violence, right?
Yeah.
Now, I can remember the struggle of even getting anyone to be interested, because they said, oh, it's been done. It's been done. Why are you going? Don't do that. It's been done. I wanted to do it. I did it. And I had a few publications out of that and my book, right? I regret the book because I think that it could have been edited a lot more successfully. But this is another struggle for researchers. You fall in love with your material. And when somebody says, take that out, you go, I can't. It's important. You know what I mean? So I don't think I gave it as good a go as I could have. And I was thinking the other day, gee whiz, would it be worth, because I still think what my outcome showed, I still think it is entirely valid and right. And so I'm kind of thinking to myself, should I go back? Should I even take that material? The publishing house is closed. The man got ill and had to close. So they're not there anymore. Do I go back and look whether I can have permission to really get back into publishing it? So if you ask me what was the most important, that to me is still significant work. And I still hear things and think, gee whiz, there's nobody, I don't feel like my contribution has even at least been given a chance. So I want to go back to that. I mean, it's got to the point where I sometimes don't listen to or read presentations anymore because I get so upset and angry. So what I think is most important, I think that domestic violence stuff was, and as I say, I think I should go back there. But I mean, there's been other areas, and currently it seems to be, I'm not saying it's the area I would most like to be in, but it's a lot more looking at the counselling profession rather than any specific part of the counselling profession. So at the moment, I'm doing a study, I'm busy analysing the data on where are they now, which looks at what's happened with counsellors since they've got their qualifications, how they got to getting those qualifications, what they did, what they found useful, where they found the gaps, and where the difficulties are. And I can say immediately, money, and more money keeps on coming out.
Right, wow. So
yeah,
the whole viability question.
Just on how to do this work, and be able to not have the concerns of making a living.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So that's my current.
Were you aware of that before you went into, or was this like one of these new things that you think, wow, this is surprising, I wasn't aware, is this?
Yeah. I mean, we know ourselves that we're not going to make fortunes in this profession, either as an academic or as a practitioner. So it's not entirely new, but just what was surprising is in terms of government funding and the effect that has on the availability of jobs and which qualifications count. That's been really interesting. I never thought that would be the case. And of course, the other thing that always comes up is that, and even in regard to money, is the tension between psychology and counselling. And, the fact that counsellors, if they charge $150 an hour, they start going, ooh, am I doing too much? Whereas it appears, and not always, I must be careful not to overgeneralize,
Yeah.
But it appears when you're a psychologist, $250 is kind of no thought given. So is that because we undervalue ourselves? Is that because of the whole drama of Medicare? What is it? And actually what has surprised me is a lot of the people I spoke to didn't think Medicare was as big an issue as it's being made out. And it's like, can we move on kind of thing. So that surprised me a little bit.
So perhaps there might be some Medicare fatigue in the discourse of counsellors.
I think so. But it's interesting because, you know, you get, for example, I had one interviewee. He's taken rooms in the CBD. Mm-hmm. He's paying big bucks. Mm-hmm. So he knows the clients that will come there will pay big bucks. Whereas somebody else has got rooms, small, you know, little. So again, they don't have that expectation. The one in the CBD is managing to get the clients, you know, so maybe we need to think. And I think that's some of the research that we're thinking about, you know, the values of counsellors and where we put ourselves on that stage. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just another question is, I understand you're the chair of the ethics committee in PACFA.
Not ethics committee, no.
Sorry, not ethics, research. Research committee, my bad.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could introduce to the audience about that committee and what role it has too, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we've got some beautiful people on that committee. Elizabeth Day in New Zealand, University of Auckland, Mayumi Purvis. You probably know Mayumi. She's at Deakin University. We've got Alexandra Blocher-Tifi. Yeah, she was at the universities in Adelaide are combining, so she's there. We've got Jules Silva, we've got Adrian Holmes, and of course, also on the committee is the editor of PACFA, Jane Marsden, who you do know. Yeah. So it's a very enthusiastic, very well-connected committee. And our role is to try and encourage research, much the same as the National Heads Research Committee. Yeah. Try and encourage research in Australia. And usually we used to help a lot with the conference. I don't think that is happening this year, but that's one of our roles. What else do we do? I should have had our little terms of reference, but basically it's trying to encourage research in Australia, promoting research. And also we support Jane as editors on the PACFA committee.
Sure. Okay, excellent. And why is that an important thing for PACFA to have this research committee, and why is promoting research important for the counselling profession?
Yeah. Why is it important? There's so many different reasons, apart from the fact that we want to have a profession that is based on solid evidence, and we want to become better, more educated, more not just accountable. We want to grow the knowledge behind what we do. I mean, just like in any other discipline, the importance of going forward and seeing what's relevant at the time and new ideas. And of course, even now, little things like working online when COVID happened. So what is best for the profession? How can we do this job best? Right. So that's why it is so important. But it is also important because we have to be accountable and to policymakers and to compete with others that are in this health environment. So, you know, our biggest competition is psychology, and they've had a very strong research practice, you know, going forever. They are probably our main competitors, but also social workers, the whole gamut of health workers. So we need to be able to show we are equitable and and that we are moving with the times. So
it's really, it sounds like
really important.
It's for our credibility that, when the government looks at these other professions, they look, these professions are credible, and part of that is the research. And counselling, this is a challenge for counselling, is how do we increase our research profile so that external stakeholders, as well as just for our own quality of product, working with clients and making sure we give quality service.
But that's also where counselling is such a complex discipline, because there are so many different modalities and frameworks, and I mean, even defining what is a counsellor and is really, really difficult. And I think we also have to put in the picture Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practices, and how we need to hold those in respect and not be able to say we are that, because we're not that. We cannot claim to do that, but to try and work together and walk alongside each other in this journey to provide for people in the best possible way. So, yeah, when it comes to counselling, we have an extra responsibility, because it is not just about one idea, one modality, and defining ourselves as that. So
you're sort of saying that we're a really diverse group of people and diverse interests, and somehow research has to also cope with and address that as the diversity as well.
Different paradigms, different values and beliefs. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the question of psychotherapy and counselling. And, some will say they're the same, others will be horrified. I was talking yesterday to some very, very, what can I say, well studied psychologists, and we were talking about these differences. And the psychologist spoke about the psychotherapist as being a psychoanalyst. So even within people in the know, really highly regarded people in the know, there's this question of what does a psychotherapist do? What does a psychoanalyst do? What does a counsellor do? And questions about, some people think that, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practices and psychotherapy should be considered specialist counselling programs rather than, have differences. So we need research. We need research, and we need conversation and debate and discussion, rigorous debate, and that's exciting, I think.
Yeah. So some consensus understandings can emerge and take us in the future.
Yeah. Or some healthy difference where we build on it and we work together and we use it rather than push it away.
Sure, absolutely. And just the final thing, any suggestions you have or advice you have, either students, academics, institutions, or the profession, or something else? What were your sort of takeaway recommendations?
Well, I'm really excited because yesterday I was having, I co-chair one of the research centres at the place where I'm working now. I think I can give them a plug, Cairnmillar.
Go for it.
So I'm at Cairnmillar, and they've got a number of research centres, and I co-chair it with somebody who's a psychologist. And the two of us and another academic were having this conversation, and it sounded a lot like psych to me. And I said, where does counselling fit into all this? And they were so open to it. And so we actually have started talking about doing a study where we're going to be looking at GPs and how they refer on. And, when they get a particular presenting problem, whether it's behavioral or an emotional symptom that they provide, what do they do with it? Who do they include in their referral system? So for me, that was like, whoa, here we are. Instead of this constant, they're different, so we can't do anything together. here we were talking as psychologists and counselors, recognizing there are huge differences, there are some similarities, and let's look what the world knows about us and how they are using us. So I think that was really, really fantastic. But yeah, I just wish that somehow in our master's courses, we can continue somehow to have research of it, because I think it's a great foundation and it's a great place for people to begin. Sure. Otherwise, I don't know if they're going to get there. And I know all the difficulties of that, but
it's a real vulnerability to our profession, research, and almost that pipeline of people coming through to be the next generation of doctoral holders and academics and researchers, as well as private practitioners being more research informed and being able to be more intentional around it. It is, to me, I agree. I think there's a massive vulnerability that we have, and the direction is, I think, it's getting worse. And it's great that you're putting this on the table and, putting it out there for people to think about, and the people who'll be watching this YouTube about this will hopefully also think about and have conversations also.
Yeah.
And I guess there's also we probably may need to look at some alternative pathways as well. And if the existing ones are closing down, we probably need to start thinking about how do we direct students towards alternative pathways so they can continue the journey.
Yeah, because, the joy that students get out of it. I had one student, she did her study on the social effects of methamphetamine use. Mm-hmm. And she won I was so thrilled. We won a community award. She did a journal article and we won a community award. There was another one who did a study on internet porn and working with those clients. And she's still getting a great deal of kudos and visibility through that. Another one who's done work with children at schools, he's doing his PhD on that. So, it's a broad area of, I always say to students, this is your opportunity to be able to be asking the questions you want to ask. You get permission to be able to be, more curious than if you were their counsellor.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's real opportunities there. If you want to find out something and really deep dive into it, research is the perfect sort of tool to actually.
If you have a passion for it, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thank you so much, Cathy, for your time.
Thank you.
It's been very valuable, this conversation, and I hope there's going to be lots of people who watch it and getting inspired and enthused and think maybe this is a research pathways for me. How would people contact you if they want to sort of reach out to you in any capacity?
Via email, so cathy.bettman@cairnmillar.edu.au. Mm-hmm. Or even, I don't mind my private one, which is cbettman@bigpond.com. I'm very happy to have emails.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you for your time. And I'm sure people will be very encouraged by what you've shared.
You can do it. What was that old ad? Or what's the Nike one?
Just do it.
Just do it. Just do it.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you. Bye now.